A bombshell name drop during testimony in the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial. Why were singers Usher and Ne-Yo brought up in the courtroom? We're diving into the connection these A-listers and music legends have to the now disgraced music mogul, and what the night in question that a witness claims they were in attendance for means to how this trial could play.
Diddy is in shock right now, and honestly he should be, because Usher just dropped stories from their past that nobody was ever supposed to hear. These aren't cute memories. These aren't funny industry tales. These are disturbing, uncomfortable.
Sean Combs is connected to a lot of big names in Hollywood and the music industry. That's not breaking news, but it was a bit of a surprise this week when Usher and Ne-Yo's names came up during testimony. The witness that brought up Ne-Yo and Usher was Dawn Richard. She was once a member of the singing group Danity Kane. That group was signed to Diddy's label, Bad Boy Records, and she also sang for another bad boy group called Diddy Dirty Money. Sean Combs was actually part of that group. It was a trio. They had a few songs that came out between 2009 and 2011. Prosecutors called Richard to testify. Now, before I get into the moment where Usher and Ne-Yo were brought up, I want to take you through her testimony and what led to the point that she brought their names into this. Now, Richard told prosecutors in 2009, she witnessed Sean Combs allegedly attack his then girlfriend, Cassandra Ventura, the singer known as Cassie, who has already testified in this trial that she was abused by Combs physically and sexually during their 10-year relationship that ended in 2018. Now, here's a line in the transcript where Richard said, quote, "I observed Cassie being attacked," and then, when asked who attacked Cassie, she answered, quote, "She was attacked by Sean Combs." In the incident in 2009 that Richard talked about, she said she was recording music at Combs' LA home. Cassie was making eggs, and then Combs comes downstairs, quote, angry, and was saying where the expletive was his eggs. Excuse my language. And he was telling Cassie that she never gets anything right, where the expletive is his food. And he proceeded to come over to her, took the skillet with the eggs in it, and then tried to hit her over the head with it, and she fell to the ground. Richard told prosecutors that she witnessed Diddy allegedly attack Cassie multiple times, physically beating her. And while she was a member of Diddy Dirty Money between 2009 and 2011, she said it was frequent that she would see these things. She said that Combs would, quote, punch her, choke her, drag her, slap her in the mouth. I saw him kick her, punch her in the stomach. Now, when it comes to Usher and Ne-Yo, their names are brought up related to an incident in 2010 that happened at a restaurant in California. Dawn Richard was asked about this incident both by the prosecution and defense, but it's interesting how her answers and the details she gives are different depending on the questions that are asked. Richard was asked about that incident. It was in West Hollywood, California. There was a restaurant, a dinner with a lot of powerful people in 2010. And at that dinner, Richard says Diddy allegedly punched Cassie in the stomach. She said, quote, "We were having a private conversation, and when we're all sitting, eating at the tables together, when I say we, I mean some bad boys, some of our other label, and some celebrities were in the room, and they were secretly arguing, and he punched her in the stomach." Sean Combs punched her in the stomach. The prosecution then asks, quote, "Who, if any, of Mr. Combs' employees were present?" And Richard says Harv Pierre, Capricorn Clark, Mia, D-Rock, Bonds, myself, and Kalina Harper. Now, the prosecution then asks Richard about Harv Pierre. He was a bad boy executive, and he answered to Sean Diddy Combs. The prosecution also asks how, quote, employees reacted to Combs allegedly punching Cassie in the stomach, to which Richard answered they did line in their questioning. They did ask about bad boy employees who were present at the restaurant, to which Richard named people like Combs, the bodyguard D-Rock, Pierre the executive. But then the defense had their chance at cross-examination, and through their questioning is when we saw those big names drop. The defense asked Richard, "Please tell me who was all at this restaurant." Richard answers, Harv Pierre, Capricorn Clark, Mia, and myself, Kalina, our bodyguards, which was Bonds, and D-Rock, Cassie. The question continues with the defense asking, "You remember who was all there, right?" And Richard says, mm-hmm. The defense asks, "Do you recall alleging several celebrities were actually there?" And Richard says yes, and the defense then says,
buried stories that Diddy thought he had locked away forever. And now that Usher is finally speaking, everything Diddy tried to hide is crawling straight into the light. Usher starts by revealing how deep their history actually goes, and it goes deeper than most people ever realized. Everyone knew Usher and Diddy had that mentor-protege thing early in Usher's career, but the part nobody knew was what really happened behind that mentorship, the chaos. the madness, the bizarre situations, and the moments that made Usher question what the hell he was even doing there. Usher says straight up that when he was a teenager, he was tossed into Diddy's world headfirst. No warning, no protection, no guide. One minute he's a young kid trying to build a career, and the next he's living inside a hurricane of grown men acting like there were no rules, no boundaries, no responsibilities, nothing but pure recklessness. He says he saw things at 14, 15, 16 years old that no kid should ever witness. He describes nights where he would walk into a room and immediately feel
Quote, so when the government asked you who was all there, and I asked you who was all there right now, you didn't mention any of the celebrities, right? Right, Richard says. The defense then asks Richard to name the celebrities. And then she says, quote, Usher was there, Jimmy Levine was there, Neo came through. There were a few others too. I don't recall those people, but those are the ones I remember talking to. The defense then pressed Richard a bit, asking why she didn't say those names before when she was asked about who was there by the defense. And Richard says she was just repeating what she told the government in their direct examination. Usher and Diddy go back decades. Usher lived with Combs for a year, actually, when he was just a rising star in the music industry. He was 13, 14 years old at the time. Usher actually spoke about living with Combs in an interview 8 years ago on the Howard Stern show. Here's part of what he said.
You're going to go to Puff Daddy's. He's going
in the 90s. Do you understand what that's like?
Puffy's place was like just filled with chicks and orgying like nonstop, right?
No, not really. I mean, but hey, it was curious. I got a chance to see some things.
Now, as far as Grammy winner Neo, he is someone who has been known to be a friend of Diddy and to be in the same social circles over the years. He faced backlash for a comment he made in the wake of Diddy's arrest during a performance in New Zealand last year, where he reportedly said, quote, on stage, I was sexually assaulted and I liked it. I had a great time and I'd do it again. He later apologized for that and said, quote, in an attempt to be playful with my fans, I made an insensitive and irresponsible joke while on tour, and I'd like to truly apologize from the bottom of my heart. This is according to the UK media outlet, The Metro. Now, the other name that Richard mentioned was Jimmy Levine. He is a music legend. He is known as the co-founder of Interscope Records, so an incredibly powerful person in the music industry. It's important to note that in her testimony, Richard did not specifically say that any of the three actually witnessed that alleged moment where Combs punched Ventura in the stomach, but she did say that they were allegedly there that night. Now, none of the three have released statements since their names were brought up in court. Combs is on trial. He's expected to be on trial for roughly 7 more weeks. He's charged with racketeering, sex trafficking by force, and transportation to engage in prosecution. He has pleaded not guilty. Joining us now once again to talk about this case is former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Safa Robinson Ferrer. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Usher's name, he comes up yesterday, and that was kind of a moment where people clearly recognize who Don Richard was talking about. What should we take away from that anecdote and the fact that Usher's name was brought up?
The fact that Usher's name was brought up, I think one of two things about it. On one hand, it's irrelevant. It doesn't go to prove or disprove whether Mr. Combs is guilty of the charges as alleged in the indictment. On the other hand, I do think that it provides background information that there were other individuals that could have possibly observed these alleged assaults or attacks on Ms. Ventura. Not only that, but if the government intends on establishing a timeline or a pattern of events with respect to Mr. Combs, his enterprise, and their dealings with individuals from the public or in the industry, it's good to note that the allegation, or at least the testimony came in, that Usher was involved with Mr. Combs early on in his career when he was approximately, I believe, 14 years of age, that he had gone to some sort of academy through Mr. Combs' enterprise or business. And the government can certainly use that to show a long pattern of behavior.
Every instinct in his body telling him he shouldn't be there. He talks about the environment being wild, insane, unpredictable, and not in a fun, party way, in a disturbing way, a way that made him feel like the adults around him had completely lost their minds. And then comes the part Diddy never wanted the world to hear. Usher says there were nights when Diddy would bring him around situations that were flat out inappropriate. He hints at gatherings that were way too grown, way too raw, way too explicit for someone his age. He says he didn't have the vocabulary to describe what he was seeing. And that's what makes it even more disturbing, because when a kid can't explain something, it usually means it shouldn't be happening in the first place. Usher talks about how Diddy framed all this insanity as teaching him the game, as if seeing all this chaos was some twisted rite of passage. He says Diddy constantly made it seem like these experiences were necessary, like this is what success looked like this is how stars were built. And because Usher was young and ambitious, he believed him, he protected him, he trusted him. But now as an adult,
dealings that he may have had with other individuals in the industry, and also to establish that Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura had this long-standing relationship, that not only, there were a select few that got to observe, but that publicly some of these allegations or allegations of violence happened, and that other people observed those things.
And when we look at the transcript, and I have it here, and you have the defense asking why Richard did not talk previously in conversations with the government about Usher being there, Jimmy Levine, who's a famous producer, as well as the singer Neo. Should we take anything away from that it appeared that their names didn't come up earlier when she was having conversations with the government?
Yeah, what we can take away and what the defense is essentially trying to do here is really strike at her credibility. What the defense did during its cross-examination is say, well, these other individuals were there and you didn't disclose their names until now. And why was that? If you are participating in a government investigation, you're presumed and you should tell the truth, the whole truth, and the full truth. And you failed to disclose a significant thing, which were the other individuals that were present. You failed to disclose that to the government. And now it's only today, as you're testifying, that we're just now hearing of these other individuals, Usher Raymond, Neo, and other executive producers that were involved or possibly witnesses to the case. Again, striking at her credibility because she did not tell the full truth at the time she was asked by the government, which later down the line during closing arguments, the defense can get up and say, Ms. Richard testified A, B, and C to you. However, she failed to disclose X, Y, and Z, and that's why you shouldn't believe her. That's why you should not give her the credibility that the judge is going to instruct you on, and the jury can take that into consideration.
And one thing that's been apparent throughout all the witnesses thus far is clearly this was a relationship that had a lot of domestic violence incidents, but this isn't a domestic violence case. Yet it seems like there's a lot of people who witnessed physical abuse. And in this case, you have Usher and Neo. I mean, these are A-list celebrities who are seeing Sean Combs punch his girlfriend allegedly in the stomach, which is something that you would think if you saw that, on the outside, if you think you'd stop that, you would step in, you would say something, but apparently they didn't, according to Don Richard's testimony. Does any of that, the fact that he was doing this out in the open, play towards taking some of the domestic violence incidents, but showing that it was a much larger thing, which is what the government's trying to prove?
So with respect to the other individuals being present, although there's an allegation that they were present, and they're not really allegations, it's just background facts. I don't know that Ms. Richard has testified that they actually observed the striking. Maybe they did, maybe they did not. But I don't think that that's going to do any benefit for the government as far as knowing that these things happened more broadly. I mean, it's clear as day that this case is rooted in domestic violence, that Mr. Combs was domestically violent towards Miss Ventura, whether it was isolated behind closed doors and just Miss Ventura, and they're a close select few were testifying to this, or on a grander scale where, a select few and publicly people can testify or people have observed these allegations, whether it was just one or whether it was many. Testimony is evidence, and whether that was testimony from one person or testimony from multiple people, the jury can still consider that as evidence in determining whether Mr. Combs is.
He's looking back and calling it what it really was: exploitation of trust, manipulation, exposure to situations a kid had no business being involved in. And then Usher drops the story that sent shockwaves everywhere, a moment from his early days living in Diddy's home. He says he would wake up to people coming and going at all hours of the night. He would see random adults passed out on sofas. He would hear things behind closed doors that made him freeze in place, unsure if he should even move. He says it felt less like mentorship and more like being thrown into a world where nobody cared about how young he was. He even admits there were moments where he felt scared, overwhelmed, and confused because nothing made sense. And nobody ever stepped in to explain anything. He talks about how the lines between right and wrong, adult and child, Mentor and manipulator became so blurred that by the time he realized what he'd been pulled into, it was already too late. And that's exactly why Diddy is panicking now. Because Usher isn't just hinting, he's confirming. He's confirming the
is guilty or not guilty. If these individuals observe that, then the hope would be that someone would have intervened earlier on. But again, it doesn't negate the fact that the charges here are racketeering, sex trafficking, and things of that nature. One of the things the government is alleging is the use of force. So I think that's why we continue to hear this domestically violent line of questioning. And I think the government is hoping that the jurors will view this as satisfactory to the element requiring requiring force, physical force of violence.
Yeah, and to your point, I'll just looking at this transcript, you're right. Yeah, it's Usher was there, Jimmy Levine was there, Neo came through. So it's saying that they were there, not necessarily that they witnessed the abuse that Dawn Richard said happened at this dinner. What did you make of her testimony now that she's off the stand?
It was pretty interesting testimony. I don't know that she was a necessary witness, although the government deemed her to be necessary. Miss Ventura got on the stand and testified about the abuse. It testified about what happened to her. Miss Richard seemingly came up behind her and corroborated for the government those allegations. And I don't think there was even a question about that. The hotel footage came into evidence. Ms. Ventura testified, so now Ms. Richard is here testifying to more allegations of domestic violence. And the government has to be really careful here, because the way that it is being painted at this point is that this is a domestically violent case, which is true. But the government needs to prove a RICO. They need to prove sex trafficking. They don't need to prove domestic violence, and it can certainly confuse the issues with the jury and ultimately land them in a verdict of not guilty.
I know some of the evidence that the government will point to, some of frequent flyer accounts, credit cards, bank accounts. We haven't really heard a lot about that as of yet. How do you see the government, now that they've really established, whether it's Cassie's testimony, some things that Dawn Richard has said about the domestic abuse, the violence that was in this relationship, where do they go from here if they are going to paint this picture of a RICO, which is essentially what they need to do in this trial if they want to get a conviction?
Yeah, so what the government's going to continue to do is put on their witnesses. I think that they got a witness on the stand that worked for Mr. Combs at a certain point in time. That individual also testified to some alleged violent behavior on behalf of Mr. Combs. I think if this individual is still testifying, or as other individuals continue to testify, we will start to hear about transportation with regard to these alleged sex workers. So one of the things that the government has to prove and show is that there was a transportation via interstate commerce, which is a very wide net and catch-all for the government in order to seek a conviction, is that these individuals were transported or traveled via interstate commerce from one state to another. So we may hear testimony about frequent flyer accounts, or whoever the individual was that set up these or purchased these plane tickets, or if they flew private. Whoever set up the transportation and travel may ultimately testify. We might hear from them to further establish that this was a sex trafficking case.
And on the interstate commerce charge, if they were to buy an escort from Miami and fly them to New York, would that be considered interstate commerce?
That would be. So the train, or excuse me, not the train, the plane traveling from Miami to New York is an indication that this was via interstate commerce, because it's going from one state to another, even if they traveled via train or
environment. He's confirming the behavior. He's confirming the madness people whispered about for years but never had the courage to say publicly. And what makes this worse for Diddy is that Usher never talks like this. He's not messy. He's not dramatic. He's not the type to go on rants or drop accusations. So when someone like him decides to open up, you know it's real. And the way he dropped it? Not soft, not subtle, not carefully packaged. He went straight for the jugular. He sat down in front of the cameras, stared dead into the lens, and said he was tired of pretending, tired of covering, tired of burying the things Titan did to keep his empire spotless. And once he started talking, everything snowballed. Because it wasn't just one incident. It wasn't one secret. It wasn't one moment. It was years of power games, manipulation, and twisted pressure no one saw. Jalen said that Titan wasn't just shaping artists, he was controlling them, molding them, watching every move they made like he owned them. And every time someone tried to leave, Titan pulled harder.
Of domestic violence might be far better today than it was 20 years ago or even before that. I mean, typically, how educated are viewers on some of the nuances of domestic violence in New York in your experience?
Not as educated as you would like them to be. But there are people, and when it comes to the jury, during the voir dire process, the judge and the attorneys have questioned these jurors. I guarantee you they've questioned these jurors with regard to their views on domestic violence, if they themselves have ever been the victims of domestic violence or someone close to them have been victims of domestic violence. And so their experiences are going to come into that courtroom. They're going to go into that jury deliberation room as they sit and discuss the case and determine whether or not Mr. Combs is guilty or innocent. However, publicly and throughout my experience as a former domestic violence prosecutor and now criminal defense attorney, I'm still surprised at how uneducated people can be to domestic violence. And some people will take the position, well, why didn't this person leave before? Not fully understanding the magnitude of what it looks like to be physically abused, financially abused, and things of that nature, having children with an individual and why you may not leave because of that, and other safety reasons. On the other hand, you have a level of where accountability needs to be had for all of our actions and the situations that we may or may not put ourselves in. So it's a double-edged sword, but I'm very surprised that people in today's society don't fully understand the gravity of domestic violence.
You have in the direct questioning with the direct testimony that Cassie had, again, it was very emotional, very raw. She broke down at times, according to the transcript and our reporter who witnessed it live. What tone? Because then you have the cross-examination, and I imagine you could be very emotional that someone is questioning what you say you went through. But it seems like from the transcript that there were even like lighthearted moments, just knowing that it says like laughs in her response from what we've seen. I mean, how do you want, if you were on the prosecution team, you would want Cassie's demeanor to be on the stand as she's facing some really tough questions and evidence?
I'd want Cassie to do exactly what she's doing thus far. First of all, Cassie comes off as a very sympathetic witness. She's heavily pregnant. Jurors
Yeah.
are seeing that. There may be some level of sympathy with regard to that. Having or observing this pregnant woman explain some of the most physically violent times of her life and some of the abuse and trauma that she's previously gone through. So jurors will sympathize with that. And that's very, very difficult for the defense to have to get over. The defense, however, they're questioning, they may be pressing her on some questions, but she still appears to be responding to them in a neutral manner. She seems to be giving appropriate responses. I haven't seen anything to indicate that she's been combative with the defense, excuse me. And I don't think there's been any significant back and forth between the defense and Ms. Ventura, which as a prosecutor, I like that because I want her to continue to come off as truthful, honest, neutral, and just tell her story and just tell the truth. So I think she's doing a great job for the prosecution in terms of her demeanor and how she's handling being questioned by the defense.
And it seems like the defense are having her read these text messages, and there's moments that it says that she is, planning a freak off, that she wants to be part of a freak off, and they're trying to show that this relationship was not as, in their opinion, volatile as Cassie's testimony made it seem. If you're a defense attorney, I mean, do you want a gotcha moment during some point of the time that Cassie...
And when you hear the way Jalen describes those early years, it hits different. He talks about being young, hungry, naive, stepping into Titan's world thinking he was being given the chance of a lifetime. He thought it was mentorship. He thought it was opportunity. He didn't realize he was stepping into something that would swallow him whole. Jalen says Titan didn't just manage careers, he engineered lives. Every detail of who you dated, who you stood next to in a club, what parties you went to, who you were seen with, and who you were never allowed to meet. Every choice passed through Titan's approval, and if you questioned it, suddenly your song rollout was delayed. Your video budget mysteriously vanished. Your interviews got cancelled. He controlled the faucet, and he never let you forget it. But the real reason people are losing their minds today is because Jalen hinted that Titan's empire wasn't built on hard work alone, it was built on secrets the industry knew about, whispered about, but never dared to expose. And now that Jalen's speaking,
Cassie's on the stand, like what's the end goal of this testimony in the grand scheme of the trial?
You always want your gotcha moment. And for the defense here, it's that Miss Ventura, you were in love with this man. You did anything to be with this man. This is a man who was larger than life at one point in time and still is larger than life to an extent. He had power. He had money. He gave you whatever he wanted. He could have given you the career, or did to an extent give you the career that you wanted. And you participated in this relationship. And in fact, you testified that you wanted to engage in these freak-offs because you didn't want him to do them with anybody else. Again, showing that this was a relationship decision. This was a mutual decision or a voluntary decision that she made to begin this relationship with him, continue this relationship with him, and ultimately it didn't work out. And what I expect the defense is going to somehow try to introduce in a very subtle way is that when you could no longer be with him, or when you couldn't just have him to yourself, you got upset, you departed from the relationship. Later down the line, or I think it was last year, possibly the year before, she files the lawsuit making the allegations. She didn't have to do that. She didn't have to disclose that. But long after they had departed, she had filed this lawsuit, which gave her a financial lump sum of money that put her in a better position than she would have been had she not filed that lawsuit. So showing that financial motivation for coming forward this amount of time later. I expect the defense is going to try to introduce that, but very subtly.
She is considered the star witness in this case because she was so close to Sean Combs for so many years and so close to a lot of the moments that are at the center of the government's case. Hard to know what the defense was expecting through this point in the trial, but has there been any moment that maybe they weren't expecting and would give them heartburn, knowing that this is the star witness and thus far, and they're trying to see that Sean Combs doesn't spend the rest of his life in prison?
Yeah, and the defense, and both the defense and the prosecution, they have heavily prepared for this case. There isn't much that has been presented that either side didn't know about before they had put Ms. Ventura on the stand to testify, or before they began their cross-examination. Every time a defense attorney gets up to cross-examine a witness, or when I ask a question, I already know the answer to that question. And so the defense is well prepared for that. I think the sticky and unfortunate part for the defense is they have to get around, and they had to address the domestic violence factor. It would have been great for them to be able to say, well, none of that ever happened, because it didn't happen, but it's clear that it did based on the Los Angeles video or the hotel footage that came into evidence, and other things that have come into evidence. Really tough for the defense to try to get over.
And hard to know where this case is going to go next, who the next witness is going to be, what evidence is going to be, kind of that moment that we'll think back to. And maybe it's Cassie's testimony, if Sean Combs is convicted, that was the moment that that the case for the government went well. But if there is a moment where Sean Combs is found not guilty, what do you see being the kind of the winning moment of what it could be for the defense?
The winning moment, in my opinion, is that if the jury were to take the view that this was just a relationship where it was a sexually deviant type of relationship, and this was something that they both participated in consensually. And it's really interesting because this company that employed these sex workers, they haven't seemed to become...
Everyone who's been waiting on the sidelines is suddenly stepping forward too. Small comments, half-confirmed stories, old rumors resurfacing, people connecting dots they ignored for years. And Titan, for the first time in his entire career, he's not responding. No statements, no interviews, no fake positive Instagram posts trying to spin the narrative. Nothing, just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel strategic, the kind that feels terrified. Because Titan knows this isn't just about Jalen. If Jalen talks, others might talk. Former artists, former employees, old collaborators, people who disappeared from the industry with no explanation, people who fled, people who took settlements and vanished, people who have more to say than anyone ever realized. And right now, the industry is buzzing because insiders claim Jalen didn't even reveal the worst yet. They say he's holding back the most explosive parts, waiting for the right moment. Usher also says he's been carrying these memories for years, and now that everything about Diddy is being exposed left and right, he feels like he finally has the space to speak on it. He says he owes it to the truth. He owes it to himself. And he owes it to the people who were hurt, because if he stays silent, he becomes part of the cover-up. But the part that really sends Diddy into panic mode is when Usher reveals that the stories he's shared so far aren't even the worst ones. He says there are moments he still hasn't talked about, incidents he's not ready to reveal yet, conversations that haunt him, situations that would completely change the way the world sees Diddy, even more than the lawsuits, even more than the raids, even more than the rumors. Usher says those stories are coming. And when they do, people will understand exactly what kind of world he was trapped in. You can feel the weight in his voice. You can hear the pain of someone who was robbed of a normal teenage experience. You can hear the anger toward the adults who failed him. And you can hear the disappointment in Diddy, the man he once looked up to but now looks back at with disbelief. This is why Diddy is in shock. This is why his team is scrambling. This is why the industry is nervous. Because if Usher, quiet, polished, respected, Private Usher, is finally speaking, then that means the walls surrounding Diddy's secrets are crumbling faster than anyone expected. And once these stories start flowing, they won't stop. Not until every hidden truth is dragged into the daylight where it always belonged.